Hey guys! So today I'm going to be doing my top 10 favorite books of this year, and it's a video I do every year, and even though I have been away from BookTube for 8 months during 2017, I felt like I had to do it. Not only will this be serving as a top 10 video, but it's kind of like a wrap up of my year. It's not all the books I read this year, obviously, but it's the best ones and, in my opinion, the most worth mentioning. However, if you are interested in seeing my most disappointing reads of 2017, I will link that video down below. Also, if you're just interested in the overall books that I read this year, I will leave my Goodreads link down below and you can check out my challenge. Do keep in mind that these books are in no particular order. I'm just listing them off in the order that I read them in, so yeah. Alright, so I think that's pretty much it. Got 10 books to talk about here, 10 books that I am obsessed with, so I should probably start this thing immediately because it could be lengthy. The first book I unfortunately cannot find, and I know it's because I lent it out to someone because I loved it so much, which means I definitely need to be buying another copy, and that is Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. This book, oh, you guys. I think it's probably on a lot of people's favorites of 2017 because it was just so good. For those of you who don't know, this book follows a group of moms who all have children who are attending the same school and they're all in kindergarten together. At the very beginning of the story, the narrator tells you that there has been a murder amongst this group of parents, but it doesn't tell you who it is and it doesn't tell you who did it until the end of the book. Even if I didn't like this book, love the writing, love the characters, love everything about it, I would have kept reading so I could know what the outcome was. So throughout the narrative, you get to follow, I think, 4 to 5 different mothers' point of views. Each one of them I enjoyed reading about so much because they all have so much going on in their lives, which is another thing that I really loved about this book because I loved reading about each point of view, which unfortunately does not happen for me enough. When I read a book with multiple point of views, which I do love to do, I don't always love all of them. So this just bumped my rating higher for this book because it was so good. Overall, I rated Big Little Lies 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. It was so good, and I am interested in reading some more Liane Moriarty, so if you guys have recommendations, please let me know. The next book that I have to mention is Into the Forest by Jean Hegland. This is a very, very different story. It's sort of like a dystopian in a way, but not in like the young adult fashion that we're all used to. It's not like the Hunger Games, it's not like Divergent, it's very different. One thing is that this is not young adult, this is an adult novel, and it follows 2 sisters who are living in a world where the electricity completely goes out. There's no water, there's no TV, there's no internet. They have cars, but they don't have gas for cars, and it's a very, very scary situation. So Nell and Eva, who are the 2 sisters, have to survive by themselves. They live near a forest, as you may know, in like Northern California, I think, and they just live their lives as best that they can now that they don't have power. I know it may sound kind of boring, and this book is really slow. It's pretty short, but it is slow. There's not a lot of dialogue. It's mostly like inner thoughts, and I don't know, it is a slow read. It is kind of dense, but I really enjoyed that about it. The writing was beautiful and lyrical, and I really just loved reading about the relationship between these 2 sisters, and I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that made my list is The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the 2nd book in the Raven Cycle series. I actually read books 2, 3, and 4 during 2017, and I enjoyed all of them. I loved the series as a whole, but looking back, I think I really enjoyed this book the most out of 2, 3, and 4. I still think my #1 favorite is the first one, but I read that in 2016. So anyway, I'm not going to go too much into detail because I can't really say a lot. It spoils the first book, but for those of you who don't know, the story of the Raven Cycle series follows a girl named Blue, and she comes from a family of psychics. However, she does not have psychic abilities. She has a power that amplifies other people's psychic abilities when she's near them. One day, one of Blue's aunts has a vision of a boy named Gansey, who is one of the Raven boys, and she is told that Gansey is going to die within the year. So She tries to prevent that from happening. She befriends Gansey and all of his friends, you know, the rest of the Raven Cycle gang, and it kind of kicks off from there. It's really, really interesting. That's not the only really interesting element. There's so many others, one of which is being that Gansey and his friends are on the hunt to locate a dead Welsh king, because if they find him, they will be granted one wish. It sounds so weird. Like, when I first heard the synopsis, I was like, what? But it's so good. It's really, really good, and it is one of my favorite YA series. I'm so sad that it's over now, but I really enjoyed it. I gave The Dream Thieves 4 out of 5 stars. The next book on my list is The Light Between Oceans by M.L. Stedman. The story follows a couple who are living on an island. The husband, Tom, is a lighthouse keeper, and the wife, Isabel, just kind of tends to everything. She tends to the land and kind of just lives a really solitary life, which is one of the reasons why she is desperate to conceive a child. Unfortunately, she and Tom experience many miscarriages before realizing that she's just unable to have a baby, until one day when a boat washes up on shore, and inside the boat is a dead man and a baby. Isabel, of course, instantly warms to the baby, and she begs Tom to let them keep the baby and to not report the boat or the dead man. And Tom is very by the book. He's a very, very good man, so this kills him. It gives him so much guilt, but he wants Isabel to be happy, and he wants the baby too. So they don't report it, and they keep the baby, and they raise her as their own. A few years later, Isabel and Tom return to the mainland, where they meet the mother of the baby that they have adopted. It's such a heartbreaking story, and knowing that, I really didn't want to read it because I knew I would be a sobbing mess at the end of it, and I was. So then why did you read this book, Penelope? Why would you do that to yourself? Well, still not really sure. I'm glad I read it. Again, very, very, very sad, but the writing was well done, and I'm interested to read more M.L. Stedman. So yes, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book on my list is Dr. Sleep by Stephen King. This is the sequel to The Shining. I read The Shining in 2016, so I picked this up right after and really enjoyed going back into the world. The story follows Danny Torrance, who is the son of the caretaker in The Shining, and it follows him some 30 odd years later as he is living his life. I don't think it's too spoilery to say this. I think most people know the story of The Shining, but Danny does have magical abilities. It's The Shining, that's what it's called. And it basically follows him as he meets a young girl who shares the same magical abilities as him, and he is trying to protect her from a group of people who are trying to use her for not good things. I really enjoyed reading this book and just seeing where Danny was so many years later. It provided some closure to Danny and his father's relationship, which I really appreciated and sobbed about. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book on my list is Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. This is a book about Norse mythology, if you couldn't already tell. Now, I am not familiar with Norse mythology, so I can't be too informative about this story, but I believe it's sort of retellings of the original mythology. My knowledge of Norse mythology stems from Marvel movies. That's pretty much it. So I really enjoyed reading about more of the characters. I loved reading about Loki. Loki is my favorite character. So I loved reading about him. I loved reading about Thor. I loved reading about Odin, and I loved reading about a cast of characters that aren't as present in the movies, so you know, you don't get as much backstory on them. It was really good. It was really funny. It was really, really funny, and I loved that about it. I would highly recommend this book if you just want like a quick sort of like magical fun read. This will do it for you. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book on my list is The Wrath in the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. This is a YA retelling of 1000 Arabian Nights, I believe it's called. I'm not familiar with the story. I wasn't familiar with the story before I read this book, so correct me if I'm wrong. This story follows a young woman named Shahrazad, and Shahrazad is married off to a king that is notorious for killing his brides. In fact, Shahrazad's best friend was his last bride, and she has vowed vengeance against this king for her best friend and for her best friend's family. You wouldn't think that there would be a lot to this story, but there is. There's a lot to this story, and Shahrazad basically wins her life each night by telling the king a story that keeps him interested. She leaves it on a cliffhanger so that she, you know, has her life for the next day and can continue on with these stories, continue on living so that she can gain her revenge on this king. However, I think the twist with this in the original story is that there's a lot more to the king's backstory. There's a lot more to why he is doing what he's doing. There's no excuse for murder, none whatsoever, but there is more to his story, which kept this story very interesting. I love Renee Audier's writing. This gave me a lot of hope for young adult fantasy because I have read, as you can see in my most disappointing reads of 2017 video, there were many that I did not like this year. And this just reignited my faith in young adult and made me want to keep picking up young adult because it was so well written. I believe I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next two books that I'm going to mention as both earning favorites on my list are part of a series, and it is Every Heart a Doorway and Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Seanan McGuire. These are books 1 and 2 of the Wayward Children series, and I loved it. I loved both of them. I loved the first book for introducing me to this wonderful new world, but I loved the second book even more. Before I go too much into it, okay. The first book follows a group of young adults who have all entered various mystical lands. It's really, really interesting because each of these characters in these stories have entered those lands, but unfortunately have come home afterwards. It's like, what happened when Alice leaves Wonderland? What happens when Dorothy comes back from Oz? This is the account, or rather this is the account of those children. So each of these young adults are sent to a school that is made specifically for children and adolescents who have experienced these lands. It is such a unique read. The writing is beautiful. I adore Seanan McGuire's writing. She is one of my favorite authors now, and I loved it so much. I love the prequel even more, which follows students that are mentioned in the first book, Jack and Jill. This one was even more interesting to me because it follows Jack and Jill's account of when they were in their mystical land that they were taken from. It's just so good. It's got such wonderful representation on different sexual orientations. There's gay, bisexual, lesbian, asexual, which was so exciting to see. I think it goes without saying, but each of these books, got 5 stars from me. The final book on this list is another Neil Gaiman book, and it is The Ocean at the End of the Lane. This story follows a grown man who is returning to his childhood home to attend a funeral. While he is there, he begins to remember a very, very strange, very scary, very adventurous time during his childhood. This occurred whenever he met a young girl and her mysterious family, all filled with her mother, aunts, grandmas, just an entire cast of really interesting female characters. And basically he and the youngest daughter go on these adventures. This book, I still remember scenes of this book vividly in my head, and to me that is a sure sign that this has become one of my favorite books. I really, really enjoyed it. It was scary, it was funny, it was so well written. It was Neil Gaiman. I think it goes without saying, but 5 out of 5 stars. Alright guys, so that's all for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. In the comments below, I would love for you guys to tell me if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, if you disagree with me, if you agree with me. Either of those things are fine and great for fueling discussions, which I like having. I'd also love to know some of your favorite books from 2017 because I have a whole new reading year ahead of me. We all do. 2018's like, come on. So I need to add more books to my list, you guys. I do. Stay tuned for my next video, which is going to be my Christmas book haul. Really, really excited about that. You can see all the goodies I got for Christmas, which there are plenty. Alright guys, so that's all for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you in my next one. Zuzu, get down. You do not get to jump on this table where my camera is. Get down. You're not gonna make that jump. Zuzu! Filming with a cat is so hard.